This week on Africa Update, Nigeria celebrates 62 years anniversary after independence in a long week of activities highlighting prayers, public lecture, and culminating in a military parade. But Nigeria is one among 17 African countries marking 62 years anniversary in 2022, becoming independent from the British or French colony. We'll take a look at the journey so far for these African countries. Also on the program, our correspondent takes a look at how tricycles are displacing taxis in Nigeria's northwestern state of Kano. Plus, our Africa Roundup, where we highlight some of the biggest stories on the continent. This is Africa Update, coming to you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. Thanks for joining. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thanks for staying. Now, it is called the Year of Africa as it marks the beginning of a new era for many African countries. At least 17 African countries became independent from decades of oppression, exploitation, and imperialism that depicted the reign of colonialism in the year 1960. At independence, many Africans think of themselves as free men and women who have earned the right to determine their own future. It's been 62 years since that journey began, and Nigeria is the latest to celebrate the anniversary. Here is a highlight of activities marking Nigeria's independence.
Nigerian Security and Civil Defense Corps, commanded by Assistant Superintendent 1, Ubu Emmanuel Mukeje. The next is the guard of the Nigerian Legion, patriotic, nationalistic, prepared and self-preparation for Second World War, the Continental Campaign, the sovereign peacekeeping mission, the development and the global nation. And the next guard is the guard of the organized labor comprised for this historic 62nd independence anniversary parade for British Nigeria. As a great sign of honor and appreciation, today's presidential parade, being the 62nd independence anniversary, to be started. It will be officially the last for the Special Guest of Honor to be inspected, and for this, the entire Nigerian Armed Forces, the Nigerian Police, and the various paramilitary security agencies and other bodies and organizations are using this unique opportunity to sincerely appreciate Mr. President during the past 8 years, consistently the meritorious service to Nigeria and his unflinching support for the Nigerian Armed Forces in its ability to defend the Nigerian nation and its citizens alike. In further complaints to the Special Guest of Honor, credible information reaching our announcer's desk states that the Special Guest of Honor assured the world body of the 77th United Nations General Assembly that insecurity in Nigeria will soon be a thing of the past. This is resulting from a renewed effort by the Nigerian
Regiment of Artillery claims to be the originator of PESTIC, as it was used by its speed gun team to ensure correct distance between the guns. This PESTIC was more like a walking stick with a silver knob, which can be opened like a pair of calipers. From this, the infantry developed the PESTIC as an aid to drill.
There are lots of obstacles. So we as a nation, we experience so many obstacles, and there are still going to be many obstacles. Although we are growing at a slow pace compared to the other developed world.
Too much ethnicity in whatever we're doing as people. We are playing a lot about religion instead of focusing on developmental issues that concerns Nigeria. We should eschew this issue of ethnicity, nepotism, and then corruption.
Everything is in our hands. Though government have their own aspect to take care of, but as an individual, we too will have what our own contribution to development of Nigeria.
All right, now let's take a look at some of the countries that got their independence in the year 1960, about 17 of them. And we'll begin with Cameroon. Cameroon became independent in 1960, date of independence 1st of January, colonized by France. Next on the list, we have Senegal, became independent on April the 4th, 1960, were also colonized by France. Next, Togo became independent April 27th, 1960, also colonized by France. Next up, Mali, September 22nd, 1960, also colonized by France. Madagascar became independent June 26th in 1960, colonized by France. Next, we also have Congo, Kinshasa. The country became independent June 30th, 1960, and were colonized by Belgium. Next up, we have Somalia, also became independent in July 1, 1960, colonized by Britain. Next up, we have Benin Republic. Benin Republic, Independence Day, August 1, 1960, also colonized by France. Niger. Niger is one of the 17 countries, also a neighbor to Nigeria, became independent on August the 3rd, 1960, colonized by France. Burkina Faso, also Independence Day, August 5th, 1960, also colonized by France. We have the Côte d'Ivoire is also one of the countries that became independent in 1960, specifically on August the 7th. We also have Chad, Independence Day, August 11, 1960, colonized by France. Next up, we also have Central African Republic, Independence Day, August 13, in 1960. Then we have also Congo Brazzaville, August 15, 1960, colonized by France. Gabon, August 16, 1960, colonized by France. We also have Nigeria, from where we are broadcasting, October the 1st in 1960, colonized by Britain. And then Mauritania, Independence Day, November 28, 1960, colonized by France. Well, these are some of the countries that became independent. Quite a number of them became independent in the month of August and also in 1960. To discuss this further, I have joining me via Zoom Dr. Kabiru Haruna from the Department of History, Bayero University, Kano, to talk about this, and we'll be looking much deeper into this issue. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Kabiru, on Africa Update. Thank you for having me. All right, so let's begin with the colonial history. Is there any particular reason why 1960 became the year that many African countries became independent?
One, there were many factors. There was a movement which we call Pan-Africanist movement, which started in America by, famous American sociologists called the W.E.B. Du Bois, who emphasized the need of Africans to unite and the African in diaspora to come back to Africa to develop Africa. Then there was the role played by the West African Student Union, most of them who studied in Europe. These West African student unions, play a significant role in putting pressure on the colonial, government to grant independence to, African countries. Then there was a role of the United Nations Charter after the 1945 World War II, in 1945, United Nations was established, and there was a charter, the Freedom Charter, which guaranteed every human being freedom to live as he wishes. So because of that charter, many African countries capitalized on it and put pressure on the colonial authorities and the colonial government to grant independence to them. And there was also a role played by the nationalists, people like Sir Awolowo, Sardauna of Sokoto, Zik, and the Pan-Africanists like Kwame Nkrumah. So the role played by these leading nationalist figures, had contributed in the attainment of independence by many African countries in the 1960s.
All right. Thank you so much. So tell us, in your view, would you say that these African countries are living the dream of self-determination, as it were, at the moment?
Yes, they are living the dream of self-determination, because if you look at the demands of the Pan-Africanists and the various nationalists in Africa, they were asking the European colonizers, the European colonial authorities, to grant political, economic, and the social independence to African countries, and which they succeeded in, winning in the 1960s, and subsequently in the 1961 up to 1994, when South Africa finally got its independence. So they are given self-determination, and at least they have the political and the affairs of their countries. But unfortunately, things are not going as many people expected them to go, because there are a lot of problems in Africa, the problem ranging from insecurity and the self-perpetuation.
But if you look at, some of the factors that have made Africa underdeveloped, based on what experts, are saying, is, this influence by former colonialists, even on African countries, despite the independence and all of that. What's your take?
Yeah, I agree with some of the pundits and commentators on the African affairs that associate our lack of development with our relationship with our former colonial masters. The simple reasons that made me to agree with them is that most of the policies that African leaders implement are not homegrown policies, are not policies that take care of our peculiarities. They are policies created by the Bretton Woods institutions, by the World Bank, by the IMF, and superimposed on Africans. So these policies honestly play a significant role in retarding the development of African countries. Therefore, I totally agree with the commentators and the pundits on, African countries and African affairs.
All right. So, the thing is, sometimes we are quick to, blame former colonialists for their role in Africa and how that they are responsible for the underdevelopment of Africa. But if you look at African countries and some of them that have, that are independent, would you say that the leaders in Africa have demonstrated enough will to make sure that the African continent is developed as it is? We have leaders who have been in position or as head of states for decades and have refused to go.
We cannot blame the former colonial masters. What we are saying is that they have a role in the development of Africa. the Bretton Woods institutions policies. And at the same time, we have to also blame our leaders because some of them are not patriotic enough and they are not, competent enough to lead the African countries. Therefore, they become leaders not with the intention to develop Africa, but with the intention to enrich themselves. That plays a significant role. You cannot play down the role played by the African leaders. And at the same time, you cannot discard the role played by the former colonial masters in retarding the development of Africans. Because theoretically, Africa is independent, but practically, we are still, answerable to these former colonial masters. They dictate what is to be implemented and what not to be implemented in our countries. And unfortunately, majority of the leaders are subservient to them because they have their own, they know their record, they know their history, they know their antecedents, and they know the atrocities some of these African leaders commit, and they know the kind of corruption which the African leaders perpetrate. So therefore, they use this kind of, antecedents of African leaders to blackmail them and to coerce and to force them to implement whatever policy they wanted them to implement. And in most cases, the policies implemented by these African leaders are not favorable to Africa and to Africans.
All right. So in that vein, would you say that, African continent is reaping, or I would say, benefiting from the dividends of democracy? What's your assessment of democracy on the African continent? Is it failing? Because we have seen coups upon coups, across the continent, especially in recent times.
The kind of dividends that democracy brought to Africa is not something to, celebrate. Even though we cannot blame external ability to harness and to benefit from the dividends of democracy, blame our leaders. Democracy is supposed to give people chance to express their yearning, their expression, and to elect the leaders that they feel are competent enough to lead their countries. But unfortunately, there is a small cycle of people who hijack the democracy for their own parochial self-interest. And we are not practicing the democracy the way we should practice it. For example, we have problem of, insecurity. We have problem of corruption, which is perpetrated by the politician. So we are not reaping the dividends, honestly, of democracy.
Okay.
That is why, as you have just said, we have cases of coup and the counter coup in various African countries because the military is using the failure and the shortcomings of the democratic dispensation as an alibi to take over various government. Even though I'm not in support of the military takeover in any country, it's better to maintain the kind of democracy that we have and to have series of military regime, because the military don't respect our constitution and they institute, a kind of dictatorial regimes in Africa, which strangulate and suffocate freedom of expression and the other forms of freedom.
All right, Doctor. So tell us, how can the African continent take control of its future going forward? Yes, I mean, we highlighted the fact that 17 African countries became independent in 1960, and this is 62 years after. That's enough time for us to begin to see, that Africa move forward and becomes a force, on the global scene. But that's not the case necessarily at the moment. So how can African continent take charge or take control of its future?
Yeah, one of the reasons or one of the ways that Africans can take control of their future is one, to identify the patriotic people who have the interest of Africa and enthrall them with our mantle of leadership. And these people that we are going to identify as leaders, we must help them by being good citizens of our various countries. We should be law-abiding. We should take law and order. And at the same time, we should be do anything that will help African continent. And at the same time, these leaders should look at the peculiarity of Africa and formulate policies based on our circumstances, based on our historical, antecedents, and based on the needs of Africa. We cannot live in isolation. We can also relate with other, countries and the continents. Any country that is more interested in our resources than in us, we should, distance ourselves from them.
All right.
I think if we can do that, we can take the future of Africa in our own hands.
All right. Thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us on Africa Update and sharing your perspectives. We do appreciate you joining us on Africa Update.
Thank you very much.
All right. Dr. Kabiru Haruna Isa from the Department of History, Bayero University, Kano, sharing his perspectives on the Year of Africa. We'll now take a short breather, and then when we return, Africa Update continues with the roundup. All right, thank you for staying. Now, as Tricycle continue to take over local transportation in Kano State, northwest Nigeria, the popular taxi drivers are gradually moving out of the route. In this report, our correspondent Idris Jibreen examines how the few remaining taxis are coping with the passenger resistance within the metropolis.
Muhammad Aminu is a taxi driver in Kano who is now forced to clean it because there is no passenger for him to carry. He says the tricycle operation has completely taken over his business along all the major routes known to be used by taxis.
You see, tricycle has taken over all the major roads we follow. And these roads include BUK Road, Zoo Road, Zaria Road, Maiduguri Road to bypass, and Rijiyar Lemu are the major roads we follow.
Few years back, taxis are known to be the popular and most reliable means of transportation within the metropolitan city of Kano. But with the advent of tricycle, popularly known as Adaidaita Sahu in Kano, this means of transportation is rarely seen on major routes of the states.
We are indeed the backward. Now you see, this taxi is mine, but there are no passengers. Even this cleaning you see me doing is because I have no choice. I could not go out because even if I did, there are no passengers.
According to tricycle riders, because of the affordability and reliability of their business, they have left taxis with options to convert to tricycle or move out of business, even though there are risks associated with the tricycle operation.
Tricycle took over taxi because the passengers prepare to use it. It is the only means of transportation since the ban of motorcycle that can take you to any part of Kano State, no matter how narrow the area may be.
Although taxis still exist in some parts of Kano metropolis, but where it's known to be their major bus stop, are taken over by tricycle, the number of which keeps increasing virtually on daily basis.
Now let's take a look at Africa Roundup for today. Burkina Faso military leader Paul Henri Damiba has been deposed in the country's second coup in a year as Army Captain Ibrahim Traoré took charge, dissolving the transitional government and suspending the constitution. Traoré said that on Friday evening that a group of officers had decided to remove Damiba due to his inability to deal with a worsening armed uprising in the country. The captain was previously head of the Special Forces Unit Cobra in the northern region of Kaya. It is the second takeover in 8 months for the West African state. Damiba took power in a coup in January that overthrew former President Roch Kabore, also due in part to frustration over the worsening insecurity. The Niger Republic government has temporarily stopped issuing authorizations for oil products deliveries to neighboring Mali unless they are destined to the UN peacekeeping mission in the country. In a statement dated September 21, Niger said that it will also revoke authorizations that had already been issued but did not specify reasons for the suspension. Niger is one of the few countries in West Africa that refines enough fuel for its local market from a small oil refinery with capacity of around 20,000 barrels per day. The UN has a peacekeeping mission in Mali to help fight terrorism. A Mali government spokesperson could not immediately be reached for comment. A Kenyan lawyer charged at International Criminal Court with bribing witnesses in the collapse trial of President William Ruto 6 years ago has died, Kenyan media reported on Tuesday. Citizen Television and Standard newspapers reported that Paul Gicheru was found dead at his home in Nairobi's Karen area, citing information from the police. The cause of his death was not immediately known. Police spokesperson Bruno Shioso did not immediately respond to a request for comment. A United Nations tribunal in The Hague has opened the genocide trial of a Rwandan businessman captured 2 years ago after decades on the run, with judges saying that the hearing must go on despite the suspect's decision to boycott it from his jail cell. Felician Kabuga, a former businessman and radio station owner, is one of the last suspects sought by the tribunal prosecuting crimes committed in the 1994 genocide, when ruling Hutu majority fighters killed more than 800,000 minority Tutsis and Hutu moderates in 100 days. He is also accused of arming ethnic Hutu militias. Kabuga was arrested in May 2020 in Paris between COVID-19 lockdowns and extradited to The Hague, where he has entered a not guilty plea. All right, with that, we have come to the end of Africa Update for this week. Join us again next week for another time on the program. Watch us more on social media platforms and also watch us live on YouTube. My name is Ayuba Ileb. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.